Hello, Eves. My name is Arup Mukherjee, Williams, class of 2009, and I have the pleasure of serving as co-chair of the Society of Alumni Bicentennial with Laura Moberg-Lavoie, class of 1999. This program, The Art of Aging, is one of a year-long series of events commemorating the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Williams College Society of Alumni. Williams is spending this bicentennial year celebrating and grappling with our past, examining our present, and imagining our future. We are united in a shared commitment to a liberal arts education, to lifelong learning, and to an inclusive society where all alumni feel they belong. Thank you so much for joining us. Just a few reminders before we get started. We had actually planned this event initially as a Zoom meeting where participant cameras could be on, but the session was so popular. In fact, this is the most popular program of the Bicentennial so far that we actually crossed over the maximum attendee allowance for a Zoom meeting, and we had to convert it to a webinar. So to that end, we encourage you to use the chat function as a space to introduce yourself, to engage in community and share any comments, questions, and reflections that you have throughout the program. And just remember to select all panelists and all attendees in the chat drop-down area so that your message can be seen by everybody. And if you have any questions during the talk, we please ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen at any time. So please don't put those in the chat. We ask that you use the Q&A function. We will have dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the program, but you can submit those questions at any point as you think of them. And please note, of course, that we will be recording this program in its entirety. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, the wonderful Brian Carpenter, class of 1986, former Williams trustee and professor of psychological and brain sciences at Washington University in St. Louis, or as many of you may know, at WashU. Professor Carpenter received a BA in psychology and English from Williams College and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Case Western Reserve University, followed by postdoctoral training in geropsychology at the University of Pennsylvania and in palliative care at the Portland, Oregon VA healthcare system. He teaches undergraduate and graduate courses that focus on aging and the end of life. And he also directs a research lab that studies ways to improve communication between older adults, their family members, and their healthcare providers. I should add that this is particularly exciting for me, as I've had the pleasure of getting to know Brian through his volunteerism for Williams in the Society of Alumni Bicentennial since 2018, serving on a variety of committees and being such an irreplaceably thoughtful voice and presence in our volunteer work. So with no further delay, please welcome to the virtual stage, Professor Brian Carpenter.
Thanks so much, Arup. It's so great to be here, and thank you for all of your presence this evening. I know it's late in the evening for many of you after a long day, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a little time talking to you tonight. So like many good things in my life, I credit Williams for giving me a launch pad for discovering some of the things that I'm going to be talking about this evening. And it began in my senior year at Williams, actually, where I had to do an internship for one of the classes that I was taking. And I traveled to North Adams every week on a little shuttle that went from campus to North Adams to an adult daycare center. And I spent an afternoon every week volunteering at this adult daycare center for older adults. And that's really where I got hooked on aging. And it's led me into an amazingly satisfying career for all these years. And so I'm so happy to be able to spend a couple minutes with you this evening talking a little bit about this topic that's been a passion of mine for a long time. It's been a quiet revolution, this aging demographic change that we're going to be talking about, but I think it's been picking up some speed, and maybe you in your own professional or personal lives have had some experience with this topic as well. We all will, of course, because we're all aging every day. But there will be some moments in our lives when this topic becomes particularly salient, particularly personal for us. So like a good professor, we're just about to enter final exams on my campus. I thought I would start out the evening with a poll. So we'll take a little bit of a poll here. And this is a cross between a trivia question and a knowledge question, I suppose. Based on the best records that we have, to what age did the oldest person live? You may have heard about this person in the news. I'll give you a hint, it's a she. Oh, see, excellent, excellent. You are very knowledgeable, Williams grads. It is a woman who was featured in a story in the New Yorker several years ago. This was a story that dealt with the dispute over her age. It's this woman from France who lived to be 122 years old plus 164 days, and they count those days. They're very meaningful days. And from my read of the New Yorker article and some additional background information on this case, it seemed pretty clear that she was actually 122 years old, even though there was some dispute about that at the time. She's the record holder, the world record holder, but this woman is catching up. Well, if you think that 118 is getting there. They maintain a list of the longest lived people in the world, and she's creeping up that list. Here she is, she's in the number 3 spot right now. I checked this list this morning. You have to keep on your toes and check this list regularly because people are moving on and off it with some regularity. You might notice a couple of things about this list. Number one, our friend in Japan has got a ways to go before she catches up with our lady from France in the number 1 slot, but she's hanging in there and making progress. There are 2 people who are currently in this top 10 list who are alive right now, both creeping up the list. You'll see at number 9, Lucille has only a few more days to ascend to the number 8 spot. So we're all rooting for Lucille over the next couple of days. Now, you might also notice on this list one other element is, and that's that there are no men on this list. I'm sorry to say, guys, we've got a little bit of work to do. The longest lived man right now is all the way down on number 20. So we've got a little bit of work to do. You might have thought that these people were unusual, and in many respects they are unusual. But the demographers tell us that these folks are maybe not as unusual as they will be in the future. And in fact, as a proportion of the population, this graph shows that the number of centenarians, people who've lived past their 100th birthday, is going to skyrocket over the next few decades. And it is going to be one of the fastest growing groups in the population. In fact, when I stand in front of a group of college freshmen, first-year students, the demographers tell us that half of them will live to see their 100th birthday. Now, for some of them, that strikes them as wonderful, and for others, it strikes them as a bit frightening to imagine living to be 100 when they're only 18. So this is the trend, though, that we're seeing. Demographers have some really cool ways of depicting this trend, and I want to show you one of them, a data visualization that I fell in love with called the population pyramid. How nerdy is that? But let me orient you to the population pyramid. I'm going to show you one in a second. So the population pyramids are constructed so that you'll see population data for a year at a time. And on the bottom axis of the population pyramid, you'll see the population in thousands. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the population broken down by different age groups. And on the left side of the population pyramid, you'll see the population for men. And on the right side, you'll see the population pyramid for women. So I'm going to start out by showing you what the population pyramid looked like in the US in 1933. And I want you to pay attention to this population pyramid as it moves and grows. And you'll get a sense of what our nation and what the world is really undergoing right now. You can see the baby boomers show up in that big blip. And they're now moving up into the later phase of life. They entered older age, after age 60 relatively recently, and here we are looking at projections into the future. So you can see that we're going to be experiencing and have been experiencing a rectangularization of the population pyramid. But the take-home message here is that there are going to be more older adults, more older people alive in the US and on the planet than at any other time in human history. And this is this demographic shift that some people have referred to as the silver tsunami. But you'll also notice in the population pyramid and how it changes is that this is not a one and done phenomenon. This is not the rat in the python making its way through the snake. These changes are, as far as we know, forever. That this population shift is going to be something that we experience in our lifetime and will continue on. So what that means in practicality is that if you've ever been to Florida or you live in Florida now and you look around when you're out in public and you see a lot of older people in Florida, that is what the entire United States is going to look like by 2030. And by 2030, the population projections suggest that 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. This is a social phenomenon. It's unfolding at a particular point in time, at a particular time in history, and it's unfolding in our local communities, our national communities, and in our global communities. And so we're all experiencing this phenomena in a social way. And this is some of the decisions that we make and some of the policy decisions and programs that we enact have an implication on how each and every one of us will experience our later years. I want to just pause for a second and acknowledge that I'm using this word, this phrase, older adult, as if there was some sort of consensus about who an older adult is. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. And I'm going to be talking about older adults in general, referring to people who have made it to 65 and beyond. But as I'll mention in a few minutes, that's a pretty arbitrary decision based on a social policy. So let's talk a little bit about some of the policy decisions that we've made over the years that are right now coming to roost and having an impact on how each of us will age. The first one is a story that begins back in World War II, when veterans were coming back to the United States. Housing was short in supply, and the federal government enacted several policies to increase home ownership among the GIs. At the same time, the automobile was becoming much more popular, and both of these trends led to the growth of the suburbs. A large number of people moved out of our traditional urban centers and moved into these new communities, these new neighborhoods. Fantastic opportunity for people to have a little plot of land and slice of this kind of idyllic suburban life for themselves. So that was a policy decision that we made many decades ago for a very different kind of population than the one that we have right now. And that shift in our population worries me and worries other people because on average, people will spend about 7 years of their life near the end of their life unable to drive. Right now in the United States, around 50% of our older adult population lives in suburban communities, and another 25% of our older adult population lives in rural communities. So you've got about 3/4 of those folks living in communities that are not well serviced by public transportation. So this is an example of a policy decision, a change in our social lives that happened many years ago that isn't really responsive to the needs of older adults today, who want to stay connected to their community, who want to stay in contact with the people that they care about. And if they can't drive themselves in their suburban or rural communities as they reach that point of their life, we're going to have a problem. Now, there are some possible fixes on the horizon. Whatever fears you might have about self-driving vehicles, I can see potential here for this technology to be very liberating for many older adults, to give them an opportunity to use this kind of technology to be able to go to the places that they want to go, that they might not be able to if they weren't able to drive themselves. This, of course, has also presented some opportunities for some entrepreneurs. So this example, for example, is a company called GoGo, and GoGo is a concierge service. If you don't know how to use Uber, if you don't know how to call a ride for yourself, you can call GoGo, and they have a concierge who will do it for you, along with a bunch of other services. So there are people who are recognizing this shift in the demographic picture of our country and are getting pretty creative about ways to address the needs that are out there. The second policy decision that I want to talk about was the passage of the Social Security Act of 1935. I don't know why these people don't seem to be smiling very much while Roosevelt is signing the legislation for the Social Security Act, because Social Security has been one of the most popular, one of the most happy entitlement programs that the United States has ever enacted. And it's designed to provide a minimum level of income support for older adults to keep them out of poverty, and it's been extremely popular and extremely successful. But let me emphasize that Social Security was only intended to provide a minimum level of income support for older adults. It was never meant to be a full replacement for people's income. In 1935, that seemed reasonable. Now, the folks who put together Social Security in 1935 did something a little bit tricky at the time as well. And in 1935, you could start collecting your Social Security benefits when you were 62 years old. Actually, that's the same age at which you can collect them now. You take a little bit of a penalty on your benefits if you take it before your full retirement age, which is well after 62 for most people. But you can still take your benefits as you could in 1935, beginning at 1962. All right, let's test your knowledge. I've got another poll lined up for you. And for this poll, I want you to tell me what the average life expectancy was in the United States when Social Security was passed in 1935. Remember that you can start taking your benefits at age 62 in 1935. All right, how did you do? Very, very close, but not as good as the first poll question. In 1935, average life expectancy was 61.7 years. Okay, now I hope that you're doing the math right now and you're seeing a little bit of a tension here between the average age at which people were dying and the age at which they could start collecting their Social Security benefits. This wasn't an error. The actuaries who came up with these numbers knew very well that a large proportion of people were never going to live long enough to start collecting their Social Security benefits. And that kept Social Security afloat for a long time. Now, fast forward, here we are in 2020. If you make it to age 65, you can expect to live somewhere around another 20 years. 20 years. So think about this. When we created Social Security in 1935, it was designed to provide income support for older adults who weren't supposed to live as long as older adults are living now. And that's one of the sources of tensions regarding the viability of Social Security moving into the future. We're going to run out of reserves in the Social Security fund sometime in the next 15 or 20 years. We'll still be able to pay benefits out of Social Security to everybody, but not full benefits, unless we make some wise and incisive decisions about how we can modify Social Security to do that. Now, most of the economists that I've talked to say that there are a couple of tweaks that would be very effective at preserving the trust fund. We just haven't had the political will to put them into action yet. Those economist friends of mine are much more concerned about Medicare than they are about Social Security. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want. I'm worried about Social Security because baby boomers have not been particularly good at saving for their retirement. Remember, Social Security was only supposed to provide a minimum level of income support, not an entire replacement for your income. So if these are the numbers that we're looking at, who is it going to fall to provide financial support for older adults when they are facing mounting housing costs, healthcare costs, costs associated with everyday goods? And will families feel like they have an obligation, a responsibility to step in where the government won't be able to support them? So you should be starting to hear the implications here for family members and for caregivers and for younger people who may be taking on some responsibility for looking after their older parents or other older family members. Here's another social change that's been happening, and that's a change in families. Years ago, we used to think about the structure of families as being pyramidal in shape. Lots of people at the younger generations, relatively fewer people at the older generations. But because of that shift that I showed you earlier, now demographers refer to typical family structures as more beanpole in shape. Fewer people at the younger generation, more people at the older generation. Now, this also has implications for family relationships because there are fewer people in younger age groups, younger generations, to take care of an increasing number of older adults. So how will families negotiate that? How will they come to terms? How will they divide responsibilities and obligations among themselves when there are fewer people to do so? Here's another change that's happened in families. People are delaying the creation of their families. They're delaying finding a partner, getting married, and they're delaying having kids. And so generations are spread out in ways that they haven't been before. And you may have heard to this concept of the sandwich generation, middle-aged people who are not only taking care of their aging parents, but are also continuing to spend time raising their own children. I don't know how they calculate this, but the epidemiologists and the demographers say that this is the first time in human history that people will spend more time taking care of their parents than they will raising their own children. And of course, that comes with a tremendous amount of financial and practical and emotional pressures and stresses on people in every one of these generations. A third change in families is that families just look a lot different than they used to. The typical 2 parents, 2 kids, dog, car, garage, house in the suburbs from 50, 75 years ago, that's just not what families look like anymore. And so right now, not only are these demographic changes happening, but so are changes to the rules and the norms and the expectations of what family members should do for one another. So think about a person who divorces in their 50s or their 60s or their 70s and remarries. What are the responsibilities and the obligations that adult stepchildren have to that new step parent? Those are the kinds of questions that families are grappling with in light of these kinds of structural changes in families. So I've talked about a variety of social changes that have been happening that are affecting the ways that we experience growing older. But of course, aging is a biological experience as well. It's happening in our bodies to all of us, a universal process. We're not aware of anybody who's been able to escape these changes, and they happen throughout the body in every system. And these are normal changes that happen to all of us because we live in an organism that is growing older. So these are all normal part of the biology of aging and how our bodies are changing. But really why these changes matter is in the case of these kinds of data. We care about changes in the body when they're associated with the development of chronic health conditions. Now, there's a glass half full, glass half empty view when you take a look at these kinds of data. On the one hand, these percentages are fairly high, the number of people who have chronic health conditions. But on the other hand, they're not 100%. So not everybody develops these kinds of health issues as they grow older. That's the good news. I think more good news is that when you look at the extent to which people over age 65 are experiencing any disability, any functional impairment, change in their ability to do the things that they need to do every day, to do the things that they enjoy every day, those rates are also relatively low. So we have a large number of older adults who are going to experience chronic health problems as they grow older, and that's a normal part of aging for many people, but not everyone. And those chronic health conditions don't necessarily lead to impairment in people's ability to do the things that they want to do or to take care of themselves. But we also know that biological aging is highly variable. If you've been to a Williams reunion anytime in the last few years and you've looked around at your classmates, we're all just about the same chronological age, but you know that by looking around, people are aging in very, very different ways. So this is a very individual experience, a very idiosyncratic experience in terms of how our bodies age. Some scientists have even questioned whether the biological aging is necessarily inevitable. There's a question mark after this. There used to be more definitive statement by the scientists that of course biological aging is inevitable, period. But I've replaced that over the last few years with a question mark because of reasons like this. That recently at the National Institutes of Health, there's been an initiative to begin a geroscience program, geroscience, which is the study of underlying biological processes that may contribute to chronic health conditions and disease. So this is a really transformative way that NIH has shifted its focus. Before, they were sending out research dollars to study arthritis. They were giving grants to study diabetes. This new approach says maybe we should be looking at the underlying factors, the underlying biology that might be contributing to all of those diseases together. And maybe that would be one way, if we can discover what's going on, to forestall this progress of the biology of aging. Another element of the biology of aging that deserves a question mark is whether it also might be reversible. This is perhaps even more controversial idea. And I'm just going to show you one example of why there's a question mark here, why it might be possible. Scientists have come back to a very, very old surgical technique called parabiosis. And parabiosis involves connecting the circulatory system of two animals. And in contemporary parabiosis research, scientists have been connecting the circulatory systems of young mice and old mice. The idea is that the hypothesis is that there are substances within the blood that influence the aging experience. And when we connect the circulatory systems of a young mouse and an old mouse, the old mouse benefits from whatever is good in the young mouse's blood. And we can see changes in the older mouse in terms of increased muscle strength, shinier, more robust coat, a whole series of changes that suggest that if we could identify what this youthful substance is in the blood, and scientists are kind of circling around that idea and hoping to get some leads there, that we might be able to reverse the experience of aging. Obviously, lots of ethical and practical questions that would need to be answered before we move this into human trials, but nonetheless, an intriguing line of research that's exploring whether there might be something that we could identify that helps us gain better understanding and control over the aging process. So aging is a biological process, it's also a psychological process. And there's a pretty good story about aging, actually. When you look at the prevalence of psychiatric disorders, for instance, across age, psychiatric disorders are lowest in their prevalence in later life. So at least in terms of frank mental disorders and mental illness, those rates are relatively low among older adults. And even when you ask older adults more general, more broad questions about how satisfied they are with their life, they seem pretty happy. That overall, despite some of the challenges, very real challenges that people may face as they grow older, that older adults seem to be pretty content, at least relative to younger people. And that might be because as we age, developmental psychologists have identified a series of changes in the way that older adults think and approach the world. And using a variety of experimental techniques to observe older adults in a variety of situations, those psychologists have discovered that, number one, older adults pay more attention to positive stimuli in their environment than negative stimuli in their environment. They attend to positive stimuli more, and they don't attend so much to negative stimuli. They also tend to dwell less on negative events, less ruminating than younger people do. When you ask them to describe a negative event, older adults use less negative words than younger adults do. They also have better recollection, better recall, better memory for positive events than negative events. And they also have a set of skills that they can wield to make sure that negative interactions don't escalate, get out of control. So psychologists believe that these are a set of normal developmental processes that people go through as they grow older that can help them experience life in a more positive, optimistic, upbeat, and satisfied way. And this appears to be a normal developmental change in how people pay attention to stimuli in their environment and think about those stimuli. So relatively good story in terms of emotional health and psychological well-being as people grow older. Now, of course, what people are really concerned about is this: changes in their memory or changes in their thinking. And when psychologists think about cognition, we're talking about these kinds of processes. And we've come to understand that these intellectual skills change differently as people grow older. And we can divide them into two buckets. And those on the left, they represent what psychologists refer to as the fluid intelligences, the intelligences that rely on a really super efficient, fast, good working brain. Whereas the intellectual skills on the right, they're referred to as crystallized intelligences, intelligences that rely on experience and our education and our world view in terms of what we've learned throughout our lives. And these two kinds of intelligences seem to follow different trajectories as we grow older. The fluid intelligences as a group tend to decline as we grow older. Let me show you an example of how we might document that in a research laboratory in psychology. I'm going to show you the Stroop task. You're going to see some words flash on the screen, and I want you to read those words to yourself. All right, pretty easy, right? And when you ask younger people and older people to do this task, they're very efficient, they're comparable in their accuracy and the speed at which they can do this. Now I'm going to show you another version of the Stroop task. This is the Stroop task with interference. This time I'm going to show you some words, but rather than reading the words to yourself, I want you to say to yourself the color the word is printed in. A little bit more challenging, isn't it? That's why it's called Stroop task with interference. And this is an exam that's called interference because this is a task that asks us to inhibit our natural automatic tendency to read words. We're really good at reading words. We learn it at a young age. We get really, really good at it. So it's hard to stop ourselves from reading. When we give the Stroop task with interference to younger people and older people, this is where older people start to have more difficulty, because it's harder for them to inhibit that automatic reading performance. And that's an indication that something is changing in their brains, something natural, something that happens because the brain is changing, just like your liver is changing, just like your skin is changing, all those organs. And so your brain's not going to be able to function as efficiently. Crystallized intelligences, on the other hand, I said, those are the intelligences that we think actually can improve or get better as people grow older. Let me give you an example of a test we might use for crystallized intelligence. You've seen these reasoning skills before, back when you took the ACT and the SAT all those years ago. So which figure on the bottom row belongs in the upper right-hand corner? It's this one. Hope you figured it out. 3 yellow dots, 3-sided triangle, 4 blue dots, goes with the 4-sided square. Okay, here's a harder one. Which shape on the bottom belongs in the upper right-hand box? Oh, this is the mean professor torturing people. It's this one. This is the correct answer. Anybody figure out why? The number of dots equals the number of line intersections. Line intersections. Got it? Yeah, tricky. This is an example of a task that we can teach older adults to be better at with practice. So this is the kind of information that tells us that there are some cognitive skills that actually get better as people grow older. What people are really worried about is statistics like this. The prevalence of Alzheimer's disease or other kinds of dementia. And Alzheimer's is a terrible disease. As many of you may know, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, it's horrible. But I want to point out one thing in these data, and that is it's not inevitable that if you live long enough, you're going to get Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is a disease, like diabetes, like heart disease, like COPD. Not everyone gets it. And in fact, if you make it to age 85, 2/3 of people will not have Alzheimer's disease. So it's a bit of a stereotype that as people grow older, they're inevitably going to develop difficulties with their cognition because of a disease like Alzheimer's. And in fact, when you look at the risk factors for dementia or like Alzheimer's disease, many of them are modifiable, something that we can do something about. In fact, the prevalence and the incidence of dementia has been going down in the last few years, probably because we've been getting better at managing some of the cardiovascular risk factors associated with dementia. So that's a whirlwind tour of some of the basic information about growing older. I want to turn now to this issue of caregiving, because I hope you've been thinking about the ways in which the social and the biological and the psychological changes that I've been talking about might have an impact, might have ripple effects on individual families and maybe your own family. So let me spend a little bit of time as we wrap up talking a little bit about the caregiving situation in the US right now. Number one, we know that it's becoming increasingly common, that becoming a caregiver for an older adult is going to be a normative experience for most people in the United States. These statistics should tell you that those caregivers come in lots of different flavors, but the vast majority of people who are taking on this role for older people tend to be women. Women, as some scholars have noted, have what's called a caregiving career and spend many of their years looking after younger and aging family members. These statistics have changed a little bit in the last few years, but still, when you look at the person who's most likely to step up to provide care, it tends to be a woman in the family. Here's what they're doing. Lots of different things. Some more practical, more functional, more logistical, like transportation or shopping, but also some tasks that are very intimate and very personal. And you can imagine how that might play out differently depending upon the history of relationships in families and the extent to which people got along or maybe didn't get along, and how that feels to the older person who is receiving that care. And what does that caregiving do? Well, it does some negative things to our health, physical health and mental health. But I also want to point out that caregiving has uplifts associated with it. It gives people a sense of purpose. It allows them to feel like they're repaying care that they have received themselves at a younger age group, at a younger age. So we're starting to understand that caregiving, which we initially thought of was primarily a negative or stressful experience, can also have some positives associated with it. In my experience, when I'm working with families who are at this phase of life, there are several stress points that come up with the potential to cause tension and conflict within families. And those stress points focus around collaborating with other family members across long distances, a point in time where older adults may no longer be able to live in their own home and may need to relocate, the challenges of locating and supervising services when they're brought into the home for older adults, managing finances, dealing with a parent who may not have the cognitive or the physical ability to drive any longer, or may not have the kind of insight we would wish into their own changes in health or cognition. Incontinence, which is the hallmark event that often leads to relocation from home to a residential facility like a nursing home. And within families, dealing with the unequal or perceived unequal collaboration and participation among caregivers within the family. So when I work with older families in counseling, these are the kinds of issues that tend to bring them in, where we spend a lot of time talking with each other. And talking is the key. Talking is the thing that we are trying to help people do more effectively. You may feel like you know what your parents want. You may feel like you think your kids know what you want. And that may be true in terms of your food preferences, whether you like Brussels sprouts or not. It may be true in terms of their ability to know your preferences regarding your music. But that's not always the case. And in my laboratory, we use a very sophisticated research methodology that's based on the newlywed game. And the way that it works is we bring older adults and their family members together, and we ask older adults privately about how they want to be taken care of as they grow older. And then we ask their family members also privately, what do you think your mom said? Or how did your dad answer these questions? And then we get everybody together and we compare them and we show them how parents answered those questions and how children guessed about their preferences, or how spouses guessed about those preferences. And I'm sad to say that our research across many studies has suggested that family members and adult children in these data are not particularly good at predicting older parents' care preferences or knowing what people want. So we've been developing a series of interventions to help families talk about what's important to them, what they value, what their preferences are before there's a crisis in the family, so that they're better prepared when they need to be making some decisions together. I'll also add that there are a number of things coming into the marketplace now that have been extremely helpful for caregivers: home monitoring and sensing devices, digital assistants, and recently the appearance of robots who may be able to assist with some of the more practical aspects of caregiving. Programs and services have also been rapidly expanding around the country. That includes adult daycare, like the one I visited many years ago in North Adams, programs to help older adults stay in their own home longer by modifying their home, and providing transportation for them to be able to go to the places they want to go. Equally important are changes that we need to make at the policy level. There are several things actually in the Biden infrastructure bill that will address the needs of caregivers, providing more financial support, more flexibility, more resources across a variety of platforms and communities to help family members who are involved in this caregiving picture. So I think there's some positive things on the horizon for those of us who are going to be involved in these situations. And I want to just close by sharing some resources. We'll be making sure that you have access to this list. These are some of the organizations that I run across in my work that I think are providing good information, solid resources, helpful details to people who find themselves in these caregiving situations. I love talking about this, if you haven't already picked up on that. So I think it's great when people call me or email me and ask me when they've got questions around aging or caregiving. And I want to close by just sharing this painting that Salvador Dali did when he was in his 20s, that I think encapsulates the reality that helps me keep these challenges around aging in perspective. And that is the fact that we are all going to grow old ourselves if we're lucky one day. And that helps us be compassionate about people who are going through challenges that are often associated with aging. So we're all going to get there. And back to my favorite source of everything, even the New Yorker is aware of that. So I'm going to stop there. I think we've got some time for questions, and Arut has generously agreed to help moderate a little Q&A.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that. And I know there was a question in the chat. But this is being recorded, so so you can always go back to those slides in the recording when it's posted on the Bicentennial website for events. So we had no questions actually until right at the end. We got a bunch of questions, so I'm just sort of going through them and grouping them. The first thing I want to start with, there's particular interest from a few folks on this webinar, specifically about Alzheimer's and dementia. As you noted, actually 2/3 you said of adults or of folks above 65 actually don't experience that. There was a question about first gender differences and if there's an explanation for that, as well as testing. and whether or not some of the cognitive tests that you put up just now are any sort of indication or something that people should be worried about.
Yeah. So let me tackle the gender differences first. So the prevalence of dementia appears to be higher in women relative to men. That's been a pretty consistent finding. And it tends to be higher in some minority communities than in white individuals. The explanation for the minority communities is probably a little more clear-cut, probably has something to do with access to healthcare, access to good diet, nutrition, less access to good management of cardiovascular risk factors or cerebrovascular risk factors, and maybe less access to education, which is good for building a really strong, resilient, redundant brain when we're younger. The story about women is a little more complicated and is a little more uncertain, at least my read of the literature, that we're not really sure if it's due to one factor or some combination of biological, social, cultural, and environmental, and maybe even psychological factors. Regarding testing, we have an Alzheimer's disease research center here on our campus, and the clinicians here can diagnose Alzheimer's disease with about 90 to 95% accuracy using their tests when following people through to an autopsy. That's using a combination of brain scans, lumbar puncture, paper and pencil testing. You may have seen in the news that there are a couple of blood tests that are coming on the market that will be available for people as well, raising some interesting questions about, to what extent will people be able to get information about their risk for developing Alzheimer's at their local pharmacy, just as people have been able to get genetic risk information now through at-home genetic risk tests. So if anybody on the call tonight found themselves having a difficult time with the Stroop task or the problem-solving task, not probably an issue. These aren't ideal testing conditions. And similarly, when people ask me, I go into a room and I'm not sure where I went in there, or I'm having trouble remembering people's names, or I misplace my car keys all the time, those are not usually a sign of brain disease. They're a sign of distraction or something else. Usually not something we're worried about. If you told me I don't know what my keys are for or how to use them, then we'd be more concerned, and that's a more extreme example. But some degree of changes in cognition are normal as we all get older.
I'm sure this is the $1,000,000 question, but I'm wondering, given the question marks that you've added to your, this is from a question, I should say, but related to your presentation, the question marks you added to a couple of those slides about reversibility, for instance. Are there any practices or that you recommend for slowing down or slowing down the effects of aging, or minimizing the risks of many of the diseases that you had listed?
So the science is best behind one so far, and that's caloric restriction, reducing your caloric intake by about a third. And there have been many studies in lots of different organisms that have shown that reducing your calorie intake by that amount seems to have some positive effects on people's health. There have been some trials in people as well, challenging trials, because it's hard to find people who are willing to reduce their calories by a third and stay on that diet for good. And there are also some changes associated with that diet that make it difficult for people. People lose weight and they get cold, an unintended and intended consequence. If you've ever heard of the blue zones, that is a research initiative that took place several years ago, where they went around the globe and looked at the longest, healthiest lived people and tried to identify the commonalities among them. And there's a very active blue zone movement that tries to put some of the principles that they learned into practice. So it's things like staying active, nurturing your social network, trying to maintain an optimistic attitude. So those things all seem to be associated with people who live the longest, healthiest lives. And I'd encourage you to look into the blue zones because they actually have some very practical advice about ways to make positive changes in your daily life.
A quick follow-up to that. This is just a personal curiosity. How have you personally, what is your personal relationship with your own research? Is it something that you find easier to prescribe than to adopt? Is it something that you find easy if you just sort of think about having a positive mental outlook, for instance, that you're able to, what are the sorts of challenges you've thought about personally?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I went to Williams, so I had all these wonderful habits of life ingrained in me from a very young age that I've tried to maintain. But it's never too late to start. So I'm as I'm reading the research and teaching it to the college students, I'm always thinking about where what are the hacks that I could be building into my own life, or the tweaks that I could be making, whether it's parking. When I go to Target now, I park as far away as possible because I'm going to get a little bit more activity in while I'm running my errands. So there are little ways like that I've put these kind of principles into action.
That's great. I guess there's no it's never too early to start. What about communication? You mentioned the process by which you try to get folks into a room. There are some folks who are eager to have those conversations, and either their parents or step-parents or children or other folks on the list of caregivers you have might be so willing. And what are the sorts of things you would recommend to those people about the resistance to those conversations?
Yeah, that's a great point. And probably every couple times a month I get a phone call from somebody who says, I need to get my mom to the doctor, but she won't go. So we do a little problem solving around that. One strategy is to start early. People get nervous when you're trying to force them to do something in a situation where there's some urgency involved. People don't make good decisions when they're stressed. People don't have good conversations when they're stressed. People don't make good plans when they're stressed. So it's useful to start having conversations about values, preferences, wishes, expectations as soon as you can, because families who get comfortable with the idea of talking about what's expected, what they want, they're going to be much better at that when there's a real crisis or a need to have a serious conversation about it. Now, people will still be reluctant to do it. Oh, I don't want to talk about that. It's so depressing, or I don't need to talk about it now. The best advice is you just you approach it, you approach it gingerly, and if you get resistance, you step back, and then you try again a little bit later. It's probably not a good idea to sit down everybody at the Thanksgiving table and say, okay, let's talk about your death. Maybe not the best situation for some families, maybe the ideal situation for other families. So you kind of have to do a little bit of an analysis of your family, its strengths and its styles, to figure out what might be the most strategic way to approach those conversations. And of course, I'm advocating for my own profession, but it never hurts to bring in a third party, a neutral third party, social worker, psychologist, counselor, chaplain, physician, to have difficult conversations when people aren't willing to have them themselves.
Do you feel, are there differences in between women and men with communication in particular around this, and what are the sorts of, if so, what are the trends, and how would you approach, or do you approach them differently?
Maybe would have been more the case, those different gender differences, 20 years ago. I think they're starting to change. The baby boomers, they're changing everything about age. They have changed everything as they've moved through life, and they're going to continue to change aging with different expectations about conversations. What's fair game to talk about. So I think those communication patterns they're less based on gender than they used to be, and more based on other things like personality or experience in people's families.
Thank you. So and I know that pretty soon here we'll be right at 9 p.m. And I think Brian and I both have a little time, so we're happy to go over just a bit because there are just an amazing number of questions and good questions, and many that we will sadly not get to. But I would love to burn through a few more. We had a couple about regulation, in particular. You mentioned, the Social Security Act of 1935. Is regulation just way behind? And what is there to do?
Yes, it is. It is. It is way behind. Even though the demographers were well aware of this change decades ago, I mean, I blame it on the inability of politicians to compromise on making some even incremental changes in policies that would be extremely helpful for older adults and their families as they navigate these waters. So yes, there are organizations, for example, AARP, or I think you're supposed to call them ARP now. You don't call them AARP anymore, and several other advocacy organizations around the country that are trying to push legislation that would address the needs that are here right now. We're watching countries like Japan and Germany and Italy very closely because they're about 10 to 15 years ahead of us in terms of their demographic profile. And they're starting to make some tweaks, some policy tweaks. And we're watching them because we want to know how they work out. Japan, for example, has had by history a relatively restrictive immigration policy. And that has meant that they haven't had younger immigrants coming in to their country to help with caregiving. In the US, a lot of the paid care that's provided is provided by female people who are not nationals of the United States, who came here from other countries. So by relaxing their immigration policy, they're hoping to address needs like that. And we could be thinking about similar things here in the US.
Do you think, along those lines, do you think nursing homes, and this is another question somebody had, will they look different in the near future than they do now?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah. Like when you ask people where they want to, most people want to stay in their own home. And there's actually some good initiatives in the infrastructure plan that Biden has proposed to put more money towards home modifications so that people can get into their house if they've got 3 steps to the front door, that they can retrofit their bathroom so they can walk into their shower rather than try to jump over a bathtub. So there's a lot of things that could be done to help people stay in their own homes, and people are looking for other models. There's a movement called the Village Movement, which it gathers together in a loose kind of subscription model older adults who live in the same neighborhood who are interested in staying connected, engaging in social activities, doing things for each other, running errands for each other. And I think you're going to see more grassroots initiatives like that to address the need that nobody's happy with long-term care right now. Sometimes it's essential, sometimes you need it. You got to have a lot of money to get good long-term care, and even then it's not the same as being at home. So I think you're going to see a lot more initiatives to help people age in place.
Interesting. I noticed, and I think this also was another question that you didn't have, and you said the one kind of thing that people can do is caloric restriction, although that has, of course, other sorts of downsides. You didn't mention exercise, and why not? And additionally to that, a calorie is not a calorie. As we sort of hear that different foods, should be treated differently, and does the type of calorie or the kind of processed nature of a food, or do cultural differences in terms of cuisine matter? You hear about the Mediterranean, the Japanese diet, and things like that. Mm-hmm. Do those seem to matter at all either?
Oh yeah, yeah. Mediterranean diet is another approach that has some really solid science behind it. So if I was going to recommend a diet to somebody, that would be the diet that my physician friends recommend to me, and I think there's good science behind that. In terms of exercise, I think the research suggests that yes, but it doesn't have to be serious weight training with barbells and marathons and triathlons. The folks in the blue zone studies, they were active, and that meant they were walking, they were gardening, they were doing housework. They weren't necessarily superstar Olympic level athletes, they were just in motion. And that seems to be what's key. Regular, consistent, routine motion.
Yeah, there's the famous train study, of course, too. I think it was Boston. The conductors and the ticket collectors, long range train study. Do you folks you work with or speak to? Is there a great fear, and is there a real risk of scams and sorts of services that precisely the people who you search for these? I know you gave a list of those organizations earlier, who need those organizations also will start to, if they're having cognitive issues, that is precisely the problem, and make them more vulnerable to the types of bad actors out there looking to take advantage.
Yes, unfortunately, and this is one of the saddest parts of this field for me, is that the prevalence of elder abuse has not really changed much over the years. And when we're talking about abuse, we're not only talking about financial abuse, but also physical and psychological abuse as well. So at the same time that there are initiatives, that are focused on some of the more positive facets of growing older, there's also a very lively group of scholars and practitioners and clinicians and providers and program administrators who are trying to develop programs to target exactly like the kind of thing that you're talking about, Arup, that this scamming has just grown exponentially, and really can be devastating for individuals.
Why do women live longer? Did we talk about that? I don't know if you really got into it.
Yeah, so there's no, of course, like life, there's no easy answer. It's probably due to a multifactorial situation, that there may be something that is protective about the neuroendocrinological experience of being a female, and that might be helpful. We also know that women, as a rule, tend to be better at managing their mental health than men are. And they reach out to friends for support and assistance more regularly than men do. They go to a doctor sooner when they're not feeling well than men do. So there are, biological, psychological, social, cultural, spiritual factors that probably give them an advantage. Now, the good thing is that if we could identify those, there's no reason why men couldn't do those things.
You don't think we're inherently limited?
I'm going to withhold judgment on that.
Is there a heritability or for dementia? Is that something that you can? Was that I can remember on the list you had? Was that one of the risk factors? Was family history? Is that right?
It is, but for a surprisingly small number of cases that we see, the vast majority of cases of Alzheimer's disease, which is just one kind of dementia, are what they call sporadic cases. So there doesn't seem to be a genetic foundation for it, but we have identified several genetic features that do appear to put people at increased risk. And you can find out about those risks through, those at-home genetic research kits. So people can find out whether they have that, whether they're carrying that particular allele that conveys an increased risk for them.
I just had one question that was at the top of my head. When you mentioned the sorts of things that you can do to caloric restriction or exercise or movement, I guess, as you put it, are things you can kind of you're able to seem to me easier than the psychological change of mindset of something like purpose, or something like some of the life enjoyment that you mentioned earlier in the presentation. I'm wondering, do you find folks able to do that? Are they able to make those kind of frames, a frame of mind? That seems like such a difficult change to make, or does it happen naturally?
Yeah, if you ask people, is it good for your health to exercise? Is it good for your health to eat a good diet? Everybody knows those things, right? The challenge is, how do you get people to do them? And that same challenge exists for those kind of attitudinal or perspective taking advantages that we think people couldn't bring to their lives if they were changing their thinking habits. So this is the $100,000 question, or that's so little these days. This is the $10 million question in the field, in my field of behavioral medicine, is how do you get people to make the changes that are going to be good for them? And there are several different theories about how to promote that change, but it's hard. It's hard.
Hey, so this will be our last question, and this has actually been asked. It looks like asked of me twice by the same person, which is fine. I'm actually very curious about it. The question was about gerotranscendence, which actually I don't know what that means. I was kind of looking it up on the side, but the individual was wondering whether or not you observe evidence of that phenomenon. I guess I would be curious to know what it is first.
Yeah. Well, I've heard the word in several different contexts, and so I'll talk about it in the context that I'm most familiar with. There was a famous psychologist named Erik Erikson who believed that people throughout their lives experience a set of challenges or crises at different phases, and it was their responsibility to try to solve that crisis. He stopped his theory. This was a theory that was in vogue, still in vogue, but more so decades ago. But he really didn't. He stopped his theory, at a certain point, and then people started to add to his theory and said, Erikson left something out in his theory, and that's what happens at the very, very later stages of life when people have a degree of perspective taking. I'm avoiding the use of the word wisdom because that comes with its own baggage. But gerotranscendence is an ability to kind of live your life outside of yourself, for something bigger than yourself, understanding your place in the universe and how you can make a contribution that will outlive you, and reaching that kind of understanding about your mortality and your limits can bring a person gerotranscendence. Definitely possible.
And that seems to be implied by some of the findings you had about how they're able to deal with conflict. For instance, lifting yourself up above the fray. Those seem like related ideas or related concepts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're talking about positive habits of thinking, but also a certain kind of philosophy toward one's life that seems to convey some psychological and maybe even physical health benefits.
It's interesting. There's one final thought, and I know we're well over time. I'm listening to Obama's memoir, and he's recounting a conversation he had with his grandmother, who said, the crazy thing, Barry, is that I'm the same person inside. That she's referencing that her body is changing, and he's reflecting as she's about to pass away before his election in 2008. But kind of what you're suggesting is that's not the case, because the experience of aging, I mean, if we don't call it wisdom, actually has an effect on who you are and what you're able to do. That you maybe are, in some ways, your same person, but actually you're changing and you're developing.
Exactly right. This is exactly why it really peeves me when I hear people talking about their parents, their older parents, and saying, "Oh, it's like we've changed roles, and now she's the child and I'm the parent." And I just want to sock them when I hear that, because no, they are still your parent. They've lived 80, 90 years. They are not a child. So don't talk about them as if they were a child. because it completely negates that experience that you were just talking about.
Well, Brian, we could go on for hours here. Thank you so much for your presentation, for the Q&A session at the end, and just sharing your teaching, research, and expertise. It's so clear. So many people signed up as a sort of record-breaking event. Thank you to everyone who showed up and being here. Just a reminder that there are many more meaningful conversations and workshops and programs that we have as part of the Society of Alumni Bicentennial. This may have been the most popular, but it is one of a whole suite and set of events that we're hosting as part of this. And we strongly encourage you to check them out. They're on our website at alumni.williams.edu/200. Even at alumni.williams.edu, you'll find a link to the Bicentennial website. And we hope you'll engage as you're able to do so. Thank you again for being here.